If life already feels demanding, consider the places where people survive at extreme altitudes, in frozen isolation, and in landscapes shaped by fire, salt, and endless desert. Across the planet, communities have built homes in regions where thin air, toxic ground, or total remoteness make ordinary living nearly impossible. From high mountain villages above the clouds and volcanic slopes, to abandoned zones and vast deserts where water is scarce, these environments constantly push human limits. Over time, people have adapted to isolation, extreme temperatures, and hostile terrain, turning these locations into places where life still endures. Join us as we explore the most extreme corners of our planet, where survival continues in conditions few would believe possible. Mount Etna, Italy. Rising like a living force that never stops changing shape, this 10,991-foot volcano has burned like Europe's greatest fiery forge for about 500,000 years. In winter, it creates a surreal contradiction as bright red lava flows across blinding white snow, sending thick columns of steam into the cold sky. Etna's special beauty also lies in its smooth black sand stretching across wide valleys and sparkling in the sun like countless crushed black diamonds. Etna has supported human life for thousands of years because its ash and volcanic rock create rich soil that helps farming and settlements grow around the mountain's base. Since ancient times, people have tied this place to myth, as if every explosion and deep rumble inside the mountain were the breath of a monster or the hammer of a god. That mix of fire, snow, myth, and human life around the lower slopes is what makes Mount Etna one of the fiercest yet most captivating landscapes in Europe. Heidushan, China. Hidden deep inside the vast gravel desert of the Karakum Basin in Qinghai, China, this place is one of the most mysterious, desolate, and darkly beautiful landscapes on Earth. The whole area covers about 46 square miles and is formed by pale white or light yellow sand underneath a surface of black gravel. So from a distance, the entire place looks like a giant three-dimensional ink painting. Streams of golden sand run through the black surface like waterfalls that dried up long ago, and at sunrise or sunset, the contrast between black and white becomes even stronger, making the mountain look both surreal and threatening. Although it looks like a solid mass of black stone, the outer surface is actually very fragile and easy to break, which is why the site has been managed more strictly since 2025, with special visitor zones and raised wooden walkways to protect the ground. The landscape shows almost no sign of life, with no trees, no birds, and no insects, so its total silence feels both suffocating and strangely attractive. Its desolation, its world reduced almost entirely to black, white, and blue sky, and the feeling of walking on a moon on Earth are what make Heidushan one of the most surreal and haunting places in China. Hunza Valley, Pakistan. Set deep between towering mountain walls, this valley sits at about 8,000 feet below snowy peaks rising higher than 22,966 feet, making the whole place feel like the bottom of a giant well of rock and ice. On the steep slopes, generations of people carved out terraced fields that cling to the mountainsides, while below them run turquoise or milky white rivers that make the landscape look even more unusual. The scenery changes sharply with the seasons, as spring glows with pink and white blossom from cherry and apricot trees, while autumn burns with yellow and orange against snow and a deep blue sky. Hunza is also known as the home of a community famous for strength, endurance, and very long life. Its water mostly comes from melting ice, and daily food often centers on whole barley, fruit, and apricot kernels, while meat appears only rarely during the year. To reach this place, people must travel a dangerous mountain road where falling rocks can strike without warning. Yet once inside the valley, all sense of hurry seems to disappear. Karakum Desert, Turkmenistan. Covering nearly 70% of the country, this desert of about 135,136 square miles is not only a vast sea of sand, but also hides a famous fire crater that has burned for decades. The crater appeared after a drilling accident in 1971, when toxic gas escaped and people set it on fire to stop the spread, but the flames never went out. The crater is about 226 feet wide and 98 feet deep, and as you get closer, the silence of the desert is replaced by a powerful roar rising from the burning ground. Around it, dark sand lies beside dry white salt flats, creating a sharp contrast between sand, salt, and fire. The name Black Sands does not come from the color of the dunes, but from the darker soil below and the withered desert shrubs, which make the whole region look like a dark sea from afar. To bring life into this harsh land, people also dug a canal about 855 miles long across the desert, deeply changing the environment around it. Dariyaboyi village, China. Trapped in the heart of a sea of death, Dariyaboyi is an almost invisible village, lying about 155 miles deep inside an ocean of sand, where brutal temperatures can swing from about -22 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Cut off from the outside world for 4 centuries, its people survived in rough shelters built from dry wood, desert mud, and even sheep dung to endure the bitter cold. Around them stands a maze of pyramid-shaped dunes rising to about 1,000 feet, always ready to swallow the golden poplar forests, clinging weakly beside a dying river. To reach this lonely oasis, a traveler must cross about 155 miles of soft, trackless sand, where a single engine failure can turn the journey into a death sentence in the desert. Each year, the region suffers up to 200 days of blinding sandstorms that can hide the sun, and even with such astonishing endurance, the cruel loss of water is slowly turning this primitive settlement into a silent ruin of the past. Gardar BA 64, Iceland. Tilted on a black beach, This giant steel wreck looks like a sea monster thrown ashore and left behind. It was built in 1912, the same year the Titanic was launched, but this ship survived for nearly 70 years as a notorious whaling machine. In 1981, when whaling was restricted and the ship no longer had value, it was deliberately run aground and abandoned on the shore. And before becoming a rusting wreck, it was known as Globe 4. The thick steel, once used to break ice, has now been eaten into red, orange, and dark brown rust, while shattered windows and bent beams make it look like a giant metal skeleton. This wreck is not silent, because when strong sea winds blow through its empty rooms, they create groans and creaks, like the crying of an old machine, being consumed by nature day after day. Its bloody history, abandoned death, and ruined shape in the cold landscape are what make Gardar BA 64 feel like a post-apocalyptic monument to the age of ocean exploitation. Tanah Barak Beach, Indonesia. Like a giant slash cut through the side of a mountain, the road to this beach feels as if the earth has been split open by a god right before your eyes. On both sides rise limestone walls about 131 feet high, cut so roughly that the people and vehicles below look as small as ants. The strongest visual impact comes from the sharp contrast between the white rock, the dark strip of asphalt in the middle, and the bright blue sea waiting at the end of the road. For centuries, the beautiful beach behind this rock wall was completely sealed off until the road was opened in late 2022. In contrast to the claustrophobic cliff passage, the beach beyond still feels untouched and quiet, with exposed coral reefs and white waves crashing against the rocky shore. That contrast between split cliffs and the open blue sea is what makes Tanah Barak Beach so striking and unforgettable. Abuna Yemata, Ethiopia. Perched on a sandstone pillar in a dry and barren land, this place of worship feels like a fortress of faith hanging in the sky. To reach it, people must climb by and across a steep rock wall at more than 8,200 feet, placing their feet on tiny holes with no safety equipment at all. Inside the rock chamber are ancient frescoes from around the 15th century, still bright and vivid as if the paint had only just dried. What makes it even more extraordinary is that for centuries, from elderly people to mothers carrying children, worshippers have still made this climb as an act of complete faith. Around it, there are no gentle hills, only towering red stone pillars rising from a desert landscape, creating a view that feels both majestic and frightening. Carved from the rock since the 5th century, this sacred place also holds the bones of ancient monks who chose to remain there forever high above the ground. Rinconada, Peru. Rising near the edge of the stratosphere at more than 16,700 feet, Rinconada is the highest settlement on Earth and one of the harshest places to live. Instead of solid homes, it is a maze of thousands of rusted metal shacks clinging to freezing mountain slopes. Rinconada is known as a huge and nearly lawless gold camp, where many miners gamble their lives inside a deeply exploitative system of work. With no real sewage system, garbage and human waste freeze into large piles and mix with toxic mercury from gold processing. At night, the faint lights from the dark mine entrances make the mountainside look as if it is being watched by the eyes of a stone monster. With an average life expectancy of only about 45 years, this place stands as a brutal image of the price people pay for a shining metal. Hikim and Tashigang, India. On the barren slopes of the Himalayas, Hikim and Tashigang sit at more than 15,000 feet, appearing like lonely islands in a sea of cloud, where people still hold on in an extremely harsh environment. The landscape here is a cold desert with almost no tall trees, only red-brown, ochre, and dusty grey slopes, along with whitewashed mud houses with flat roofs clinging to the hillsides to resist snow and wind. This place is especially famous for having the world's highest post office at about 14,600 feet and the highest polling station on Earth at about 15,300 feet, to the point that government workers must carry oxygen cylinders while doing their jobs. Winter here is extremely severe, with temperatures dropping from about -22 degrees Fahrenheit to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, so people can grow only hardy barley and peas during the short 4-month thaw. Because of the permafrost and the rock-hard ground, burial is almost impossible, and yaks are not only used for carrying loads, because their dried dung is also placed on rooftops and used as fuel to keep homes warm through the long winter. Even under such brutal conditions, many people still come here to send a postcard as a special milestone and to see with their own eyes how human life can endure at the far edge of cloud and snow. Annapurna, Nepal. Towering at 26,545 feet, this massif is not only among the 10 highest mountains on Earth, but is also infamous for a bloody climbing history that once made it one of the deadliest peaks on the planet. It is not a single mountain at all, but a massive mountain system, strong enough to block weather and create two completely different worlds, one wet and green, the other dry and cold like a high desert. At its base lie rhododendron forests and green valleys, but higher up the cliffs become steeper and the hanging ice more unstable, turning the mountain into a place where avalanches and collapsing ice can strike at any moment. This massif also holds a special place in history because it was the first mountain above 26,247 feet ever climbed by humans in 1950, although the climbers paid a terrible price with severe frostbite after surviving storms and losing their way. Hidden inside the massif is a giant glacial basin surrounded by snow walls rising above 23,000 feet, making people feel as if they are standing at the bottom of a vast arena made of ice and stone. To truly feel the scale of Annapurna, people often walk a full circuit of about 99 to 143 miles, and that journey is exactly what has made it one of the most majestic and haunting trekking routes in the world. Tilicho Lake, Nepal. Suspended at 16,138 feet, this lake appears like a giant turquoise jewel in the sky, where dazzling beauty always comes with danger. The lake is nearly 3 miles long, about 1 mile wide, and as deep as 279 feet, set inside a world almost stripped of all green life, leaving only blue water, dark grey rock, and blinding white ice. The route to reach it is famous for steep scree slopes and landslide-prone trails, where every step demands care, because one slip can send a person straight toward the abyss. Fed by glacier melt, the water glows with an unusually rich blue color, and from late autumn into spring, the lake often freezes over and turns into a silent, unnerving sheet of cold. For many Hindu pilgrims, this is also believed to be a sacred lake linked to the Ramayana, which is why some people accept the dangerous mountain route just to stand beside its water. Its extreme altitude, unreal color, unstable trail, and deep spiritual meaning are what make Tilicho Lake one of the most beautiful and frightening lakes in the Himalayas. Minqin County, China. Trapped between two giant deserts, this oasis feels like the last line of defense, trying to stop two seas of sand from becoming one. It is a violent sandstorm machine that can lift millions of tons of yellow dust, block out the sun, and sweep straight toward major cities. To protect their land, local people planted straw by hand in millions of square grids across the sand, creating vast, checkerboard barriers that slow the wind and hold moisture. Along the edge of the oasis, many old earthen houses and walls have already been half buried by sand, giving the area the look of a post-apocalyptic world. To save this land, water has even been brought in from far away, as if giving new blood to an oasis slowly running out of strength. Lop Nur, China. Marked on the earth like a giant human ear listening to the universe, this wandering lake of about 1,158 square miles has now fully evaporated, leaving behind a sterile and lifeless dead zone. Once erased from public maps, this deathland endured 45 secret nuclear weapons tests, leaving radioactive craters like scars that never truly disappear. At its center lies an ocean of salt, hardened like steel, covered with sharp crystals that can tear open tires, while beneath parts of the surface hide thick salt mud traps, ready to swallow any careless step. Over millions of years, wind and storms carved the place into a devilish maze of cliffs and strange stone pillars, and the whistling air through the cracks sounds like mourning from a buried ghost city. This sea of death not only steals direction through magnetic anomalies and broken navigation systems, but has also become an unmarked grave for reckless expeditions that entered and never returned. Even today, you cannot simply buy a ticket to go there because reaching the core requires special security permission and a convoy of off-road vehicles worth millions of dollars just to survive the journey. Maunsell Sea Forts, United Kingdom. Standing alone in cold water and thick grey fog, these giant steel structures look like the ruins of a forgotten wartime civilization left offshore. Each tower weighs about 331 tons and stands on a concrete base driven into the seabed, but over time, that huge weight has slowly pushed them deeper into the cold mud below. Even more bizarre, one of them was once taken over and turned into a self-declared micronation with its own passports, currency, and years of strange legal disputes. They were first designed by Guy Maunsell in 1942 as forward sea forts meant to stop bombers and enemy craft before they could get close to the mainland. Later, after the military left, the abandoned forts were seized by pirate radio operators and transformed into offshore stations, blasting rock music beyond government control. Today, no one can simply climb up them, because the stairways are broken and eaten by rust, so visitors can only pass below by boat and stare up with a mix of curiosity and unease. Fraser Island, Kagari, Australia. Like a living contradiction, this island is made entirely of sand, yet it supports a dense rainforest ecosystem, which is why it is known as the largest sand island in the world. Stretching about 76 miles, it is also famous for freshwater lakes perched on sand, so clear that they seem unreal and holding almost no aquatic life. There are no paved roads on the island, and its giant sand dunes still keep moving, slowly burying even ancient forests that stand in their way. On the eastern shore lies the wreck of a former hospital ship from the First World War, thrown onto land by a cyclone in 1935, and now left as a rusting steel skeleton. The island's former name was linked to a shipwreck in 1836, an event that marked the beginning of a dark chapter for the indigenous people of this land. Even though its beaches look beautiful, the surrounding ocean is extremely dangerous because of rip currents, sharks, and deadly box jellyfish, making a simple swim a serious risk. Mir Mine, Russia. Once the most powerful diamond mine in the world, this giant funnel produced as much as 10 million carats a year and became a massive source of wealth for an entire nation. The mine was discovered in 1955 and worked in brutal permafrost, where crews once used jet engines and explosives to break the frozen ground. The pit is about 1,722 feet deep and 3,900 feet wide, so huge that the spiral roads around its walls look like a road leading down into hell. Its enormous scale, violent mining history, and cold, isolated setting are what make Mir Mine one of the most haunting, man-made pits on Earth. Guatemala City Sinkhole, Guatemala. Striking with brutal force in the middle of a crowded city, this black abyss opened and swallowed an entire 3-story factory in a single moment. With a width of about 66 feet and a near vertical drop of 98 feet, its walls looked so smooth and perfectly round that some people even imagined an alien laser had carved it. The most disturbing part was that when people looked down into the hole, the building was gone, because the violent collapse and underground water had crushed the debris and dragged it into the hidden cavities below. The area was later sealed and paved over, so today it looks like an ordinary road, hiding one of the most terrifying urban collapses ever recorded. South Pole Station, Antarctica. Standing at the very bottom of Earth, this research station sits in an endless sea of ice, where people live on a frozen sheet about 9,301 feet thick. The place follows a brutal cycle of about 6 months of constant daylight and 6 months of polar darkness, and winter temperatures can plunge to about minus 116 degrees Fahrenheit. To avoid being buried by snow, the whole station stands on lifting supports that can raise the building over time. When light bends through drifting ice crystals, the sky can produce the sundog effect, making it seem as if 3 suns are burning at once on another planet. In this silent white realm, every compass becomes useless, because no matter which way you walk, you are only heading north. Even with the risk, the remoteness, and costs starting around $50,000, people still dream of coming here to watch the sky torn open by ghostly auroras. Badain Desert, China. Holding one of nature's greatest contradictions, this geological masterpiece buries human life so deeply that fewer than 100 people live scattered across a desert of nearly 18,919 square miles. The standing dunes here rise to about 1,509 feet, and when strong wind sweeps their slopes, the whole desert can roar like thunder, which is why it is known as the world's largest field of singing sand. The strangest paradox is that beneath this dry sand lies an underground water system feeding more than 140 lakes hidden between the dunes, turning the desert into a maze of water in a sea of sand. Under harsh sunlight, the water shifts into glowing patches of jade, pink, and purple, making the desert look as if it is shining from within. Around those bright eyes lie pure white rings of crystallized salt stretching for many feet, creating the strange illusion of frozen winter inside a blazing summer. This surreal beauty is not only overwhelming, but globally recognized because Badain was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2024. Norilsk, Russia. Bound in the tundra, about 186 miles north of the Arctic Circle, this closed city feels like a devil's forge, producing about 40% of the world's palladium. Norilsk was built from 1935 with forced labor from the Gulag system, and Norilsk records say 16,806 prisoners died here from hunger, cold, and brutal work. The giant concrete apartment blocks had to be lifted on steel piles driven into permafrost, as deep as about 1,640 feet to survive the sinking ground. Acid rain has torn the surrounding vegetation into a grey graveyard, and at times industrial waste has even stained nearby rivers a terrifying blood red. The climate is so merciless that the streets are almost completely free of homeless people, because only a few hours outside in winter can freeze a person to death. Even with the bleak and damaged look of an isolated industrial city, the black sky above it sometimes erupts with ghostly auroras dancing over blazing smokestacks in a scene that feels both beautiful and frightening. Veryovkina Cave, Abkhazia/Georgia. From what looks like only a small opening in the mountain, this abyss drops more than 7,257 feet, making it the deepest cave ever explored by humans. Inside, it keeps changing from huge chambers to narrow, wet cracks so tight that explorers sometimes have to remove gear just to squeeze through. Because there is no flat ground to rest on, they must sleep in hanging tents, fixed directly into vertical rock walls. The greatest danger is water, which can rise very fast after rain and turn the deep passages into deadly flood traps. After more than 50 years of continuous exploration, this anti-tourism forbidden place has not only challenged people, but also taken the life of the diver honored in its name. Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA. In 1962, a trash fire in an open-pit mine let flames spread quietly into the coal seam below, and over time, it turned this place into a ghost town. From there, the fire spread underground across nearly 1 square mile, moving through tunnels as deep as about 295 feet, and continuing to burn for decades. The heat below cracked the ground open, sending out white smoke and toxic gas, while nearby, patches of land were baked into a pale grey dead zone. The abandoned highway cutting through the town was also warped by the heat and covered in graffiti, making it look like a ruin from the end of the world. It took nearly 20 years for the government to admit that the town could not be saved, and about $42 million was spent to relocate residents and tear down hundreds of homes. Even with rusted warning signs about deadly collapse and poisonous gas, tens of thousands of curious visitors still come each year to see this land burning from below. Sun Dung Cave, Vietnam. This is no longer just a cave, but a buried underground world beneath tropical forest, so surreal that it feels like a real hollow earth. The cave even has its own weather, as vapor rises from the underground river, forms clouds, and creates rain inside the darkness, while beneath giant skylights, a jungle grows up to about 98 feet tall, reaching desperately toward the light. Over millions of years, calcium-rich water has built stalagmites around 230 to 262 feet high, standing like stone towers in the dark. Across the cave floor, house-sized limestone blocks lie beside soft white sand and a black underground river, creating a landscape that feels both breathtakingly beautiful and deeply unsettling.